Alexandria Archive Institute /Open Context video, I'll introduce archaeological interpretation and how to create narratives for different audiences based on that interpretation. Understanding how to interpret or use the data and patterns from an archaeological site in a narrative for an audience is an important skill for communicating new knowledge and understandings of the past. Archaeological interpretation takes a variety of forms. They can appear as signage at archaeological or heritage sites, as well as at national or state parks. They also pop up on museum placards as you explore your local cultural center. They can even appear as full stories written by archaeologists or archaeology-interested authors as fully published books. We call all of this interpretation because we have no way to ensure that what the evidence supports having happened, or from a statistical perspective disproves not happening, actually did. Instead, we examine the evidence and interpret it to get an idea of what happened or could have happened. To put this in terms of data literacy, interpretation is when you are able to argue and communicate some point based on the data that you've read, worked with, and analyzed. Doing this can be as simple as a few sentences. To address B question, I did C things and came to the conclusion that D supports or disproves E answer to this question. Or it can be as complicated as writing an entire graphic novel. A lot of work goes into interpretation in general, but also into creating interpretations as stories or narratives that people like to engage with and understand. This is where thinking about interpretation in relation to your audience matters. Your audience will determine logistical aspects of your interpretation, such as its length, the medium that you use, word choice, and other things. They can also guide what you create in terms of appropriate reading level in your language, their level of familiarity with archaeology, so how much jargon you can use, and the kind of content that resonates with them as an audience. While not all data will support stories that immediately resonate with all audiences, we can consider which aspects of a data set to highlight in relation to specific communities. To help guide the interpretation and creativity process, we'll start with your data. What question did you aim to answer by reading, working with, and analyzing it? Then, what answers did you come up with based on that process? Now, what pieces of evidence support those answers? Your question, the analysis and evidence, and then the answer are like the beginning, middle, and end of a three-part story. You had a question, you set out to answer it, and then you found the evidence to answer it. You can even put your details into the following format to write a basic story. To address B question, I did C things and came to the conclusion that D supports or disproves E answer to this question. Now that you have a basic story, how do you transform it into something that your audience wants to pay attention to? Should you highlight how exciting the process was? Tell it in an engaging way? Or share a very important conclusion? All of these are techniques to get your audience to listen, but to figure out the right one, you need to know some things about them first. Building on the work of the digital data stories gabbing about Gabii and To Disrupt and Delight, let's consider some questions that will help you create archaeological interpretations that work for your audience. Remember, this doesn't mean changing what the data support or disprove. Instead, it means crafting a story about those conclusions in a way that the people you're communicating with will understand, follow, and enjoy. The first question is, who's your audience? Name them, and then record information about who they are in terms of age, level of familiarity with archaeology, and their language proficiency in terms of both familiarity with the language that your material will be in, and in terms of archaeological, scientific data, or statistical jargon. Now, consider the topics that engage that audience. What are the media they consume, and can you create using that media? And how long are those medias on average? These help create guidelines for how much and what kind of detail to include in your interpretation, the appropriate tools you'll need for making and sharing that interpretation, and the tone or voice you should use within it. The level of and which details to include should be sufficient to make your point based on your data. However, if you want to use a specific medium, such as TikTok videos or microblogging, you may need to adjust what aspects you highlight because of their limited duration. TikTok videos are on average only about 35 seconds, and microblogging platforms limit the number of characters used in each post. Therefore, it's really important to make sure that your medium, in terms of length limitations, tools needed to create it, etc., works with and supports the detail necessary for your interpretation. Or if you want to use a specific medium, that you maintain accuracy, usually by creating a more specific or minimalist interpretation while tailoring it to the limits of that medium. Lastly, you'll want to consider the tone or the voice that you use in your creation. This can be considered in terms of the emotion that a piece conveys, the characters that help tell that story, or an assessment of the bias in the way that the story is told or how it frames an argument. These features get at what exploring the data just on its own doesn't: the elements of human connection. They are also often the most difficult pieces to plan for because of their subjectivity. This means that different people will respond to or identify these elements in their own way. So consider the audience that you're focusing on and what kind of topics engage them. Where or how do they access that content, and what kind of approaches resonate with them as a group? Now that you've learned what archaeological interpretation entails, practiced coming up with a basic story, and reflected on your audience, I hope you're excited to create and share your first draft interpretation of archaeological data. For those of you who might want more support, I recommend playing the game Data Stories to Disrupt and Delight over on itch.io to get a detailed walkthrough for creating a narrative product. If you want to learn more about things like how to cite the data you used in your interpretation, check out our video, What is Data Citation in Archaeology? Or explore our other videos for more information on archaeology and other data-related topics.